Hi everybody, welcome to this course on modern optimization. In the last few lectures, we have talked about optimization methods that work with a single solution at a time to solve a problem. That is, we produce a solution and then we tweak that solution to produce another solution. However, when we look around in life, often multiple solutions exist for a given problem. For example, various brands offer a product for the same purpose and compete against each other for the market share. Today we shall see that nature itself works on that principle. And we shall see how some very successful and popular optimization methods, called genetic algorithms or evolutionary algorithms, have been designed by following these principles from nature. The methods that work with only a single solution at a time are called single-state solutions. The examples of such methods are gradient descent or hill climbing methods. There are many variants of the hill climbing methods that we discussed briefly in the last video. Some of the famous single-state methods are simulated annealing and taboo search. These are not strictly hill climbing methods, but they are still single-state methods because they work with only a single solution at a time. Despite their dissimilarities, all these methods produce a single solution. For example, in this plot on your screens, we must find a value of x and y variables such that this combination of x and y variables minimizes this function that is called the rastrogen function. Minimization means that we want to find the combination of x and y that minimizes the value on the z-axis. We start with a solution and then modify that solution to produce a new solution. Now, if that new solution is better than before, we accept it. But if the solution gets worse, such as in this move, then a selection procedure decides whether we retain the new solution or the older solution. Details of these selection methods differentiate between all the method names that appear on top of your screens. Also, here is a two-dimensional version of this problem on the bottom of this slide. And here we want to find a value of x only such that it produces the maximum value on y-axis. Now we have switched from minimization in the rastrogen function to maximization here. This is only to remind you that optimization means both minimizing and maximizing, depending upon what is it that we want to do at the time. Now, those who wish to research into these methods can study the impact of various parameters of methods such as simulated annealing. So study the impact of temperature and how to update temperature in each iteration, and you can compare the effect of these changes on a problem of your choice. And you can read up literature on the motivation behind the design of simulated annealing from physics and metallurgy. Now, coming back to the single-state methods, the problem is how to find the better peak. That is, if we have found a locally good solution, how do we get to even better solutions? So we discussed some solutions last time. For example, we can tweak the solution many times and pick the best of those tweaks. However, we still work with only one solution at a time, and hill climbing methods do not allow for degradation in the solution quality. So what did we do? Well, we said let's relax that constraint, and we discussed methods such as simulated annealing that do accept some drop in quality in the hope that this will lead to a better peak. However, even then, we have no guarantee that we will find the better peak before the optimization method times out. That is, we have run all our iterations. So instead of using single-state methods that work with only a single solution, we come to what are called the population-based methods that use a population of solutions. Each of these solutions is called a candidate solution because we will pick one of these at the end of the optimization procedure. A clear benefit of using such methods is that they sample a greater area in the space of solutions that we want to cover. Some solutions cover good areas and some cover bad areas. But overall, we get a greater idea of the kind of solutions that we can have. Such methods tend to work better as global optimizers, and I hope you can see why. Well, as we spread out our spies across a larger area, we shall get better idea of where to find a better solution. However, note we do not simply run hill climbing on each of these solutions individually. This is because if hill climbers simply work with one solution at a time, whereas we have a population, so we must take advantage of having a population, not simply work with just one solution in isolation. Okay? Having a population gives us certain advantages that can allow us to be innovative. And one easy innovation that we can bring in is that these population members can share information with each other in a way that a lone solution in hill climbing cannot. Let's see how. So, a great advantage of having a population is that we can combine partial information from each solution to make a new solution. For example, suppose we have a population of solutions as in the plot on your right side. And each of these solutions is an XY pair. So we pick two of them and then we recombine them to get a new solution that has X coordinate coming from the solution S1 and Y coordinate coming from the solution S2. Who knows? Now this solution S3 is better than both S1 and S2. Or we can recombine them in a different way. Say we average the X and Y coordinates to create an in-between solution that maybe is much better than both the parents. And of course, we can still tweak a solution individually as well, just like in a hill climber. So perhaps we add something to the X coordinate and maybe take away something from the Y coordinate. But one question here, unlike the single state methods, is that we have to select which solution to modify. Why? Because we have so many solutions to work with now. Quite unlike the single state methods where we are only dealing with a single solution all the time. Then once new solutions are produced after a tweak or modification, the next question is, do they get accepted back into the population? And if so, which solution do they replace? Now they must replace somebody, otherwise the population size will get bigger and bigger. And that may be a problem because, as we know, the population growth needs to be kept in check, otherwise we run out of resources. So these are some of the big questions that you must answer while designing a population-based optimization method. Do not worry if you're not fully getting, all that ideas as to how to really implement that. We will show you, how these things happen. At the moment, I'm just giving you a bigger picture. How the population methods are designed. Finally, if we keep recombining and selecting relatively better solutions, then the characteristics of a small percentage of solutions accumulate in the population and the population starts to look similar. This is called convergence. For example, consider here how solutions start to get closer to each other because their X and Y coordinates are getting similar. However, one problem with this convergence, the example of which you have seen, is that it is possible for the solutions to converge around a suboptimal area of the space. If this happens, that is called premature convergence. And there's a lot of research on avoiding that, but there's no definite answer as yet. Now, it turns out that population-based methods often are inspired by nature. This is why they are also called nature-inspired computing or nature-inspired machine learning. So if you recall the categories of optimization methods from the first video on Introduction to Modern Optimization, you would recall that we mentioned some names. And their names such as swarm optimization, artificial bee colony optimization, show a clear link with nature. However, among them, the most popular are called evolutionary algorithms because they are inspired by natural evolution. In turn, evolutionary algorithms come in a few forms such as genetic algorithms, genetic programming, evolution strategies, and evolutionary programming. So let us now consider the inspiration behind genetic algorithms, or as they're commonly called, GAs. Evolutionary biologists have always wondered why natural organisms look different depending upon their environment. For example, trees in the hills are tall and quite different from those on the beaches. The polar bear is white to resemble its background, but it's not the only one that can hide in its background. If you look closely, here's a predator that hides well in its background, so he or she can catch its prey. So why are these animals so well suited to their environment? Well, the answer is that each of them has specialized genetic material that has evolved over generations. This means that these organisms actually represent solutions to their environmental challenges. So the question is, does natural evolution represent a search for a solution to a complicated problem? And if so, what can we, the computer scientists or artificial intelligence practitioners, learn from it? So let's head to North Pole and conduct a thought experiment. Suppose aliens have descended on Earth and want to study what kind of organisms will survive in the uninhabited North Pole. So environment represents a problem here, and the environment provides the data for the problem. It is very complicated data because the organisms have to use all their senses to absorb this data. And we are looking to solve a problem posed by our environment. So the solution will be an organism, and that organism must be able to consume all the environmental information and be able to survive the environmental challenges. So the aliens select a set of polar bears. They just happen to accidentally pick these animals that they saw walking around. And they also perhaps briefly visited Africa and just collected a bunch of leopards from there as well. And their experiment begins. They just silently observe what happens. So let the evolution begin from here. And so let's call this our generation 0. So the trial begins, and we find that the polar bears are fit enough to reproduce in this environment. To reproduce, they use genetic breeding mechanism. We also call these mechanisms as genetic operators because the child is a cross between the two parents. The first genetic operator is so-called crossover. And so these two produce another child and another and another. Even the leopards produced a child due to perhaps some luck. Maybe the female was pregnant before she came here, or some animal protection organization rescued her. That's life for you, that's environment for you. Sometimes unfit organisms survive as well, as this leopard did, at least for a while. Also note that nature is not binary. So you could be relatively less fit. For example, the third bear was not able to reproduce. Perhaps it was sick or some accident happened. while the other two bears were fitter. Regardless, our generation 1 is complete now and ready to reproduce. So again, two bears produce 4 offspring. Second and third bear also produce an offspring. But something strange happened this time around. The two bears at the top had a black spot that wasn't there in any of the parents. So during getting the copies of DNA from the parents, perhaps a copying mistake happened? This mistake is called a mutation. Mutation is generally dangerous and it often causes miscarriages in pregnancies. But thankfully, it happens rarely. Occasionally, though, very occasionally, mutation can be useful as well. So suppose the two mutated children reproduce again, and they produced another 5 children like themselves. They also produced a child like their parents, that is, without a black dot. So it appears the black dot was a useful mutation. Maybe it allowed the bears to spot each other easily, while other bears were lost in the snow and never mated. Also, black spotted parents still produced a child without the dot. So it means that it is possible for the child to not look exactly like the parents. And so the child does not inherit everything. In the end, these black spotted bears are the solution to the problem. If, that is, we stop our evolution right here, we stop the experiment right here. They are, at this moment in time, the most suited to overcome the environmental challenges, while others lost out due to chance or their poor genetic makeup. So we can say the evolutionary process searched for the solutions to the environmental problems, and this final generation represents those solutions. These solutions were arrived at using mechanisms of crossover and mutation, where crossover happened mostly and mutation happened rarely. The leopards were just too poor for this problem, so they lost out and were replaced by better solutions. Of course, this is just a thought experiment, and in real life, a situation may be different. But hopefully, this gives you an idea how we can use the evolution to design an optimization algorithm. Let's see. While that was biology, if we use the lessons from natural evolution to solve computational problems, we enter the exciting field of evolutionary computation. In evolutionary computation, or EC, we simulate evolution. That is, we borrow lessons from evolution to solve computational problems. While the environment in nature poses the challenge, in EC, our problem definition represents that challenge. The problem definition is represented by an objective function or a fitness function. So EC involves solutions to a given problem using a population-based approach, but instead of using the real crossover and mutation, EC uses artificial genetic operators that we shall see shortly. Another name for evolutionary computation is evolutionary algorithms, or EAs. As mentioned earlier, evolutionary algorithms are of various kinds, but the most famous names are on your screen. Of these, we shall focus particularly at genetic algorithms and genetic programming. So here's your first taste of an evolutionary algorithm that we call a genetic algorithm. We start off by creating a starting population. We call that process as a population initialization process. We then evaluate every member of the population to give them a score or a fitness value. And then we start a generational cycle of evolution where the GA, or the genetic algorithm, uses some selection mechanism to pick some individuals from the population as parents and applies artificial crossover and mutation to produce offspring. The offspring go into another population that we call the offspring population, Although in some variants of GAs called steady state GAs, the offspring can join back their parent population instead of going into a separate offspring population. But those details are for later. So once the offspring is in place, it also gets evaluated and gets a fitness score. And if it is the best solutions found so far, we take a note of it. So that way, when the whole offspring population gets full, it becomes the next set of parents and it reproduces the same way. However, the parents from the current population keep breeding offspring until the offspring population is full. So GA produces as many generations as set by the user or until some quality criteria are met. Now, GAs are now well known in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and major corporations like Google and Uber have embraced them as well. However, they were originally popularized by John Holland, the late John Holland, unfortunately, with his famous book that came in 1975. It's titled Adaptation in Natural and Artificial Systems. Most papers on GAs will cite this work. And here is a graphical depiction of a GA cycle. So if you wish, you can pause the video here and you can stare at it. This basically reflects the method that is given in various steps on the left of the screen. So what kind of problems do GAs solve? Well, another way to answer that question is what kind of solutions can be represented in a GA population. But first off, some terminology. In GAs, a solution is also called an individual, a chromosome, or a genome. So do not be confused if you hear all these terms. The way a particular solution is represented is called its genotype. For example, if you are evolving a vector of numbers, then that vector is the genotype. However, how that solution behaves to get its fitness score is called its phenotype. For example, your DNA is your genotype, but how you look like is your phenotype. In GAs, sometimes though genotype and phenotype refer to the same thing, that is the solution. So let's come back to the question, what kind of solutions can we evolve? Well, the answer is that depends on what kind of problem you are solving. The GAs most popularly use bit strings. Here, each solution is represented by a string of ones and zeros. So for example, if you want to select from a certain set of options, you can use this representation. A popular application of that is feature selection in machine learning. GAs also evolve vectors of real numbers or permutations of elements. So for example, if you want to solve the traveling salesperson problem, then each solution is a permutation or a sequence of cities to visit. If your problem so demands, you can also evolve vector of integers or even complete programs. For example, as in the robot guidance problem that we discussed earlier. When we evolve computer programs, then the GA takes a new name. They are no longer called genetic algorithms, instead they are called genetic programming. Essentially, GAs can evolve any kind of data structure as long as you can define artificial genetic operators of mutation and crossover for them. So let's study the genetic operators. And the first operator is mutation. In biological organisms, while the DNA is copied from parents to offspring, sometimes copying errors result. This error is called a mutation. Because it's an error, mostly the impact of mutation is detrimental. However, occasionally a positive result is also produced for that organism. For example, the coronavirus these days is developing new variants through mutations, and some of them are giving the virus an advantage, like high transmissibility. Although that's not great for us, it is great for the virus' own survival. Thankfully, though, the chances of mutations are rather small in biological processes. Therefore, when we use mutation in GAs, we use it with a very small probability. So for example, we can say that while copying a GA individual, we mutate it with low probabilities such as between 0.001 to 0.1. To understand the mutation itself, exactly how it is implemented, you must read the code of the respective GA software packages that you're using. Okay, so one example is on your screens. If you're using R and there's a GA package in R, you can look at the code for the various functions that you're using. Reading code is a great way to learn how to program. So here's an example of mutation. Suppose your individual is a vector of ones and zeros. Then the mutation involves selecting a position. We call this position a gene to follow the biological analogy. And then the mutation makes a random change to this gene. Because in this case, our solutions are just binary vectors, so a 0 gene turns into a 1 gene after the mutation has happened. Likewise, if instead we are working with a vector of real numbers, then again we select a gene position and make a small change to that gene value that is a real number. Of course, how big a change we are going to make depends upon the exact implementation of mutation, and that exact implementation can vary. Note, mutation changes genetic material in an individual. This means it tries or explores new values for the genes. As discussed in earlier videos, in all optimization methods, a consistent challenge is to strike a balance between exploration and exploitation. Mutation is an exploratory operator. For those interested in reading up a comprehensive review of this topic in genetic algorithms, I have put a link on your screens, and also I put that in the description of the video below. In contrast to mutation, crossover simply recombines or reuses the genetic material that exists in the parents. Simulated crossover in GAs is also motivated by that fact, but it is a lot simpler. So let me present to you perhaps the most popular form of crossover in genetic algorithms, that is called a one-point crossover. First of all, the GA selects two solutions or individuals as parents. These solutions are aligned, and then a common crossover point is randomly selected on each of those solutions. So you can see that on your screens. There's a line that is representing the crossover point. After the crossover point has been selected, then the material on the right hand side of this crossover point is swapped to produce what we will say offspring solutions. Okay, so you can clearly see that the material on the right side has been exchanged. Now, one-point crossover is not the only form of crossover used in GAs. Some practitioners use what we call a two-point crossover. Again, two parents are aligned together, and this time 2 points are selected along their genetic material. So as is the case on the left side of the screen. Okay, and after the crossover happens, the material that exists between these two crossover points is swapped. So you can see the result towards the right side. As you can see, the material in between the points has been swapped. A third popular form of crossovers is called a uniform crossover. Again, we select two individuals and align the two individuals as parents. And then at each gene position, a random coin toss is simulated. For example, a random number between 0 and 1 is generated. If the number is greater than 0.5, the gene values are swapped. Otherwise, the parental values stay. So you can look it up, the implementation of uniform crossover or different crossovers. And if you want some ideas for implementing testing genetic algorithms, well, you can compare the performance of different crossover operators on a problem of your choice. Okay, and that will give you 3 different modern optimization methods to compare. Regardless of the type of crossover, the spirit of crossover is to recombine genetic material from different solutions in the hope that this recombination can produce an even better solution. So the theory is that if each solution contains some useful building blocks or sub-solutions, then as we apply the crossover again and again in a population, then there is a good chance that sometimes these blocks will recombine from different parents to make a super solution. Therefore, there's a lot of GA research that investigates which problems facilitate emergence of building blocks in GA populations and how to design better and better GAs that can exploit the building blocks that emerge. One problem, though, that can defeat crossover is the so-called linkage problem. This happens if the good blocks are located far away from each other. Remember, the GA itself does not know which blocks are better. It just so happens that, say, the two blocks are contributing very well towards the fitness score, whereas the other stuff in black is no good. Okay, and it is time to do crossover. So this individual is paired up with another individual that contains some moderately useful stuff in the middle. Now, if we use 1-point crossover, that means we randomly choose a crossover point as we have selected here, and then we swap the material to its right side. Now, do you think as a result of this, the top guy will gain or lose? Pause the video here and think about it. Now, I hope you can see that the top guy will lose a top block and in return will only get a medium block. So crossover did not recombine useful building blocks, but instead it separated two good blocks. So this is called a linkage problem between blocks that depend on each other. So researchers work to propose solutions to such problems. So this is why for example, they propose that instead of using a 1-point crossover, if we use a 2-point crossover, that means we select two random points as crossover points, then we only swap the stuff between the two crossover points. And if the crossover points are chosen as on your screen, then we get a much better solution after the crossover. As you can see, the top guy has not lost its good blocks and has also gained a medium performing block as well. Plus, there are other forms of crossover. For example, if we are dealing with real numbers, then instead of simply swapping values, we can average their values. So consider two individuals named V and W here. Then we can create an offspring by simply taking the genes from the same positions and just average them out. Hence, we get a new solution U, where each gene is an average of the genes of the two parents. Note, however, the crossover produces only one offspring this time instead of two, as was the case with other crossovers. Finally, we come to selection. When there's a population of individuals, who should be selected to breed new solutions or to create offspring? Okay. Remember, our quest is to find better and better solutions. And we hope that if we recombine the better performing solutions from within the population, then hopefully they will produce offspring solution that may be even better. Okay. However, we still want to give a small chance to weaker solutions as well, because the weaker solutions may be hiding some useful building blocks somewhere. So perhaps the most common selection strategy is called the roulette wheel selection. While in a standard roulette wheel, as appears on your screen, every number is equally likely to be selected. In GAs, we create a biased wheel. In this wheel, the fitter a solution, the bigger is its slice in the wheel. So that means if we randomly selected an individual, the fitter individuals have a greater chance of selection. This is why roulette wheel selection is also called fitness proportional selection or fitness proportionate selection. And you can see why. However, in GAs, we select again and again until an entire new population is created. So there is a small chance that the weaker solutions will also be occasionally selected. By allowing at least this small chance, the GA promotes participation of a diverse set of solutions as much as their fitness permits. So genetic diversity is important. Okay, that this participation of diverse set of solutions means genetically diverse solutions are participating in the breeding process. This is important because, as I said earlier, even a weak solution may be hiding a good building block somewhere in its genetic material. And this building block may not be appearing in the better performing solutions. So this is why the participation of the majority of the population is important. Typical GA packages come with roulette wheel selection built into it. So you do not have to worry about how to implement it yourself. You just have to understand the concept. Now, in fitness proportionate selection, the magnitude of fitness has a huge role. This means that if the population contains a solution that is massively fitter than the rest, then that particular solution will be selected again and again so often that only it will breed nearly all the time. Is that good? Maybe if repeated recombination of this one individual produces a super solution. But the downside is that the next population will contain all the members that are very similar to this one solution that we had already seen. So we can say that the population has converged or become very similar to each other. And that means that if we use crossover, then it will not be able to recombine different genetic material to create new solutions. Yes, we have mutation, but mutation applies with a small probability. And even so, it simply makes random changes. So what are the chances that you will find something better by just searching randomly? Normally, when a population is converged, we stop. But losing the poor solutions due to a high selection pressure may be good because it quickly removes bad performers, but may also be bad if these poor solutions contain some good sub-solutions that are not there in the better solutions. So because of these issues, other selection schemes have emerged. One popular scheme is called tournament selection. In this, you first randomly select a pool of n individuals from the population, and then you pick a winner. The winner is the fittest member of the pool. This gets us one parent. Then we repeat the same process to get the second parent. Now here's a bunch of questions for you to discuss. Which of the tournament and roulette wheel selection is computationally cheaper or quicker to run? Secondly, if one member of the population becomes massively fitter than the rest, in which selection method this individual will quickly dominate the population? By that, I mean that the population will contain a lot of copies of this one individual. Next is if we change the magnitude of the fitness in the fitness function. For example, in the sum of bits problem that we have seen before, if we change the fitness value from the simple sum to now square of the sum, which selection scheme do you think will be affected and which will not? So think about it, discuss it, leave your answers below, and I shall see you in the next lecture. Bye.